Good morning and assalamu alaikum. My name is Hermione Granger, and today I'm going to tell you about the Empire. One of the first Mughal emperor was Babur from 1483 to 1530. So his son was Humayun. Humayun's son was Akbar. Akbar's son Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb. All these people. Actually a really long chain of these things of the Mughal emperors, but the main six that people usually talk about are the ones I just told you about. So as Babur was the son of Humayun and also the first Mughal emperor, I would like to tell you about him first. His name was actually Zahiruddin. His name was actually Zahiruddin Muhammad, and he was the first founder of Mughal Emperor. His nickname was actually Babur, and which actually meant tiger. He was given this name because of the way he behaved in battle. Um, he was born in Central Asia in 1483, and Babur was a descendant of Temur, and Temur was actually a Mongol. And this guy Temur, I'll tell this more history and detail about him in the future videos. For now, let's just leave him aside. Babur was actually a really great warrior, but unlike his ancestors, he loved nature and poetry. His ancestors usually destroyed stuff. If you know more background about Mongols, I'll tell about Mongols in my future videos as well. But if you already know about Mongols, you should also know that they were destroyers practically. I won't say not all of them, but most of them destroyed everything. Uh, he, Babur, had a dream of ruling an empire as great as his ancestors because Timur and Genghis Khan, all these guys, they all had a great empire. Just like Babur, Babur wanted the same kind of an empire and to live up to their legend, that kind of thing. He had this dream. So Babur felt that because Punjab and the Delhi Sultanate had been conquered by Timur more than one century earlier, he had the right to rule them. So in about 1504, he captured Kabul in Afghanistan and made a base from which to attack India, or as it was known then, Hindustan. So, not only was Babur a great warrior or anything, he was also a very great strategist. Um, so, Babur, in November 1525, accompanied by his eldest son, now he had also a son in till then. His age was at that time 17, and Babur and Humayun both, they both had an army of only 12,000 men. Uh, Babur crossed the Hindu Kush and then swept inside the Punjab, and he crossed the river Indus and reached Panipat at the north of Delhi. And here in 1526, Babur met this army of there was a sultan named Ibrahim Lodi, which and his army was about 100,000 men, which also had 100 elephants. Their battle was when it ended. At the end of it, that 20,000 Hindustanis, including the Sultan Ibrahim, died, and the Delhi Sultanate was at an end after 320 years of rule. And many people ask this question, that how did Babur win when his army was so much smaller than of his enemy? And one of his most that question that's actually a very good question, but a way to answer it, his one of his techniques, you could say, was his new weapons, which were firearms. That was in that time weapons that were used by uh, gunpowder that used gunpowder. So he had these firearms, and Babur had siege cannons and field guns and matchlock pistols that terrified the enemy and their horses and elephants, which actually was a really great strategy because the elephants were got scared while hearing uh, loud noises and sometimes even trampled their own army. So Babur's secret weapons were which he used at the Battle of Panipat were still very new to this world at their time. So Babur had to hire Turkish soldiers who knew how to use them. And firearms were not only very expensive, but they were also very dangerous at that time because while using them, if you didn't know how to use them, you could even blow yourself up. So you had to be very careful with it. So mostly Babur used the handheld guns, and gunpowder was very much used in that battle. So gunpowder was actually discovered by the Chinese in the 9th century. It was a mixture, it still is a mixture of potassium nitrate and charcoal and sulfur. And the Chinese called this invention was actually Chinese called it the black powder, and it was used to make rockets, simple cannons, and bombs. But the black powder was forgotten for many centuries until the Europeans themselves learned to make it in the 13th century. And in the 15th century, European gunsmiths made small arms, which were actually guns that could be held in the hand. That's why they were called small arms. The matchlock pistols, fired by lighting a fuse, was developed from 1460 to 1480 and was used by Babur at the Battle of Panipat. So, one of these most important, other than guns, was cannons and cannons. Actually, yes, cannons were only used after that, and probably as by the early 14th century, cannons were developed, and cannons were actually heavy, very heavy, and weighing more than thousands of pounds, and some were up to 25 feet long. And these cannons were made from iron and brass and moved on by carriages. And even so, cannons carriages would only travel 3 or 4 miles in 10 days. That's how heavy they were. And 250 oxen used to pull these carriages just so they could move 4 to 3 miles in 10 days. That's very heavy. And elephants were also used to push the cannon from behind, while the oxen pulled it from above, forward. And so Babur was now an emperor, and after the Battle of Panipat, Babur's men wanted to return to their homelands in the Central Asia because their homelands were very cold and cool, but the country was really hot and their food was very little there, very scarce. But Babur did not want to go back home after all that he fought for. So he gave a speech to his men, and that they agreed to stay in India. And the army quickly captured Delhi, Agra, and Babur finally declared himself the Emperor of Hindustan. So, like I said, he was a great strategic general, and Babur really in wars. And if you want, if I've missed some points in my own speech, you could go at Wikipedia, which is also very informative, and you could see more about the wars. New problems were faced for Babur because Babur's success did not immediately give control of him of the Delhi Sultanate lands. In about 1527, he defeated the powerful Hindu Rajput prince of Rajasthan. Before this battle, Babur made a speech to his army, swearing never to again drink wine until and unless he had won. So basically, he smashed his wine cups and poured the wine into ground, uh, into the ground. Well, mostly this I found from the internet, and one of my books also. I searched it a lot, but there's also another story about this. Yes, he did smash his wine cups, and the other story is that he poured vinegar in his wine, uh, so that it could not be tasted. But like I believe more into the ground, that wine was poured into ground, because it's more believable. That who keeps vinegar wherever he goes? I don't think that's possible. It could be, but I like this better. Uh, but after a difficult battle, Babur defeated the Rajputs, and 2 years later he defeated an army near Patna led by Mahmud Lodi, who was actually a brother of Ibrahim Lodi. Now that Babur could establish his power, he built up Agra as his capital and gave land to his nobles, and he put 3 sons in charge of his provinces, and he appointed Hindus and Muslims to organize his local administration, and he also collected taxes. So now that the Mughal dynasty, now because of this, the Mughal dynasty was properly found. Um, Now, after his long rule, Babur, it was time for his death, and in about 1530, Babur became seriously ill because of drinking so much alcohol and opium. His body was so weak now because of drinking too much. Um, his favorite son Humayun, which will in the future be his successor, um, when Babur was ill, his Humayun rushed to him and to meet him and take care of his father, of course. But he too became seriously ill because he got the same fever while going to his father. Uh, Babur walked around Humayun's bed even in his own illness. He walked around Humayun's bed 3 times, and praying that his life would be taken and that his son may survive. Because if Humayun died, who would be his successor? And indeed, that did happen. Babur later died that year, and his age was only 48. His body was actually buried in. He was firstly buried in a garden on the banks of the river Yamuna at Agra. But in about 1540, it was moved to a small memorial building in his favorite garden in Kabul. So I hope you like this video. Most probably, inshallah, I will upload another video of Humayun, and please subscribe, share, and like my video. I hope you enjoyed. Allah Hafiz.